Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Kim Witczak, an advocate. What is she an advocate about? Well, this is what we're going to find out today. Welcome, Kim. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for reaching out to me and wanting to get to know me, and I'm glad to get to know you and look forward to you telling us your story and talking about the things that are important to you. Welcome.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. I so appreciate you actually responding back when I wrote you to let you know how much I've enjoyed your Substack. And I initially found it because I'm a huge fan of Jennifer Sayes. And that's really where I started to follow you. So I love how it just kind of gives and, we give and take, and that's how the world works. So thanks for having me. And I'm excited to have this conversation. But you said advocate, and I like to call myself the accidental advocate. And I call myself the accidental advocate because my advocacy is something that I would never have chosen, but sometimes things in life choose us. And that's how I became an accidental advocate. So I have to tell you the story. Almost 20 years ago, I was on August 6, 2003, which is coming up. In a couple days, I got a call from my dad that changed the trajectory of my life forever. And I got a call that my husband of almost 10 years was found dead hanging from the rafters of our garage at age 37. My husband wasn't depressed. I mean, he was a guy that he had just started his dream job with a startup company and was having trouble sleeping. Went to his doctor. His doctor gave him a 3-week sample pack of an antidepressant, told him it would take the edge off and help him sleep. And that was a total of 5 weeks that my husband was on this drug. But to understand who Woody and who we both were, we both traveled a lot for our work. Woody was a big, he went to the doctor because he was a big athlete. I always say that he likes Humpty Dumpty. He was a Humpty Dumpty doctor, meaning, he breaks his leg, you go get it fixed, you get stitches, you go get it fixed. So I think he just did, because I know a lot of people wonder why, he ever went to the doctor because he wasn't sleeping. So it's not, I look back now, it's 20 years and, I've been doing this work. His death made no sense the night that he was found because this guy loved life. I mean, he was a huge personality. He did not have history of depression or mental health issues. We had just booked our 10-year anniversary trip to go to Thailand. We booked our a trip to Hawaii with his parents. We were just starting to talk about having kids. And so there was so much that was happening during that time that literally when I got that call, and I was out of town on business when I got that call because I hadn't heard from Woody. And I really should start by saying even the first 3 weeks he was on the drug, I was out of town in New Zealand on a shoot for advertising on BMW. So I wasn't there to see what was happening to him. And I came back from the trip and I was super excited to see him. And I'll never forget something that turns out now to be a gift because I had Woody walked through our back door, completely drenched in a blue dress shirt, fell to the floor, and his hands around his head like a vice. He's like, "You gotta help me, Kim. I don't know what's happening. My head's outside my body looking in." And he's bawling and he goes, "I don't know if I can handle another one of these." And I remember what? I had never seen that behavior from him. And we calmed him down. We prayed. We did yoga breathing. We did everything we could. He eventually called the doctor and the doctor goes, "You got to give it 4 to 6 weeks to kick in." And so Wood lasted another week. And I remember obviously that phone call and was the most horrible thing I've ever can imagine. I can't even imagine it, my dad having to make that call to me to tell me because I hadn't heard from Woody all day and we talked all the time. So I'm thinking, "Hey Dad, just go check on Woody. I think he might have fallen, hitting his head or something." That's what I'm thinking. And I can't even imagine the shock that it was for my dad. But that night when I was out of town, the coroner asked me a question. The coroner asked and said, "Was he taking any medication?" And I was like, the only thing, I go, I don't know the name of it. And she finds a bottle sitting on the kitchen counter and says Zoloft. And I go, oh, yeah, that's it. And she goes, we're going to take it with us. It might have something to do with his death. That was kind of clue number one. And also, ironically, the front page of our newspaper in Minneapolis had an article that said the UK finds a link between between antidepressants and suicide in kids. And so almost immediately, Woody didn't leave a note. There was just something intuitively in every part of my body that it made no sense why this guy loved his life, would take his life. And so really that became my mission, to get black box suicide warnings on these drugs, and started going out to DC. I mean, I went out there, gosh, we were out there probably a month after Woody died. It was like I turned into this other person, but it sprung into action because obviously, I don't know if there was like a part of me, like in this weird kind of way, that I thought Woody would come back if I figured it out, come back. But the reality is it was never bringing him back. But if we could make and save the pain for another family, when we knew that, when we Googled that night that Wood was found, learned that the FDA had advisory board meetings in 1991 when it was just Prozac on the market, and it was all about the emergence of violence and suicide. And at that time, the advisory board members all voted no, that there was no link. The FDA said, oh, you better study suicidality. They told Eli Lilly. They never followed up. And meanwhile, approve more drugs in that class, being Paxil and Zoloft, and then also for children. And so that became, my mission. And ultimately, I call it the battle for Woody. We were able to get black box suicide warnings added. I also had I worked with HHS and, Congress, testified in the Senate on ways to, because they started to investigate all the monies that were going into these antidepressant manufacturers, as well as I had a big wrongful death failure to warn lawsuit against Pfizer, where there were all sorts of documents that we got out from under seal that showed that these guys, the FDA, the drug companies, knew about the link between antidepressants, suicide, and didn't warn us, the public, or our doctors. And so that really became, we accomplished it. But what I quickly thought, I thought, oh, good, I've done my part. I'm going to go back to my normal life, and realized that this was not just an issue with antidepressants. It was the whole way our FDA drug safety system works. So that really is what I do today. I work on all kinds of drug safety issues. I sit on the FDA advisory committee, the same one that in 1991 didn't do their job. I now am the consumer rep, so I represent the public. And because, these decisions actually have real life consequences. As I mentioned, I'm coming up on 20 years, and I look back and there's a lot that we accomplished, but at the end of the day, it was that somebody's life had to be, impacted. And the truth is, there's a lot of lives that were impacted by this delay of getting warnings put on and our safety system. So
working on this FDA committee, how has that been? What's that like? I think most of us have no clue as to what it, to serve on some kind of a government committee like this. What is that like? What's kind of the pattern of meetings and interaction that happens there?
Well, it's funny, like you and like many, I never knew that this was something that existed, but it's part of the FDA. They use advisory committees when they're outside experts. So people that, especially when there's issues to do with maybe a drug, or maybe they want to get more information on, like I've done things on this Alzheimer drug that's on the market. So really, it's an opportunity that the FDA brings us together. We get to analyze the data that the companies present, and we also get to then dive deep into, the data, asking questions. The FDA usually tasks us with questions, like do the benefits outweigh the risks, et cetera. Would you recommend approving it? And so it's basically an outside group that provides information to the FDA. They may or may not take the advice of the advisory committee to do with whatever issue, but for the most part, they usually do take the advice of our committees. So it's interesting because, I represent the consumer, and I got appointed to this position after I testified in the US Senate years ago by the FDA commissioner. And it's been an eye-opening experience because it's really like how the FDA, works. And I was shocked that in my advocacy over the years that doctors don't learn how this works. And so if they don't know how it works, can they be critical thinking when they're giving us, the drugs that we take or might recommend that we take. So my background is advertising and marketing. And so it's very interesting to sit on that committee because for me, I can't help but have the lens of marketing in when I look at the data. And, a lot of times the data, I always say, of course, the whole goal of the FDA is to get these drugs on the market, right? The companies need to use the FDA. That's who's the clearinghouse, approves it and puts it on the market. So I assume that the data is going to always show, for the most part, the risks, the benefits outweigh the risks. I mean, that's kind of how it's set up. Even because, a lot of times right now, it's interesting. There's so many games or ways that the drugs are coming on the market. They're coming on, it's really interesting. If you start listening in the news or, watching over the pandemic or even these new Alzheimer's drugs, it'll be everything's for an unmet need. And an unmet need is just basically it's a regulatory ability to go fast track your trials. And so you start seeing the power of words in, breakthrough, because, for the average person, breakthrough means, oh my God, it's going to be an amazing drug. We need it, right? And so it's really a pathway to regulation. And it's always fun because we get to ask the companies after they present data. We get to ask questions if we have concerns, we need clarifying. And then I do something a little bit different when I'm preparing for these meetings. I also love to go and see what Wall Street and the business behind the product is, because that is an insight that I've had through my advertising. Because when we take on a new client, we have to go in and look at something from a 360-degree review. And so it's fun to go and see, what does Wall Street have to say about it? And then how do they position it? And when they start talking about it, it has the potential, like one of the drugs we did not too long ago was this Parkinson's psychosis drug that was being Nuplazid, that was it was a breakthrough, and, it brought in, it was only like 180 people that were in the trial. And so, there were all these things, but Wall Street analysts said this drug had a potential to be a $2 to $3 billion a year off label, which means it's all about, like, once it's on the market, how do you market it and start promoting it, even though it was never approved for that condition. And so I remember like bringing that question up in the meeting, and you could see like people around me like, why are you bringing this up? This isn't what we're talking about. And I'm like, oh yeah, it is. Like, it's all about marketing. And once it's on the market, and how does it get advertised? We're one of only 2 countries in the world that even allow drug ads. The other is New Zealand. And so all of that kind of paints a lens for me in which I review these drugs.
I don't know anything about all this stuff. So this is very, very interesting to me. Have there been drugs, pharmaceuticals that have been approved and that have been going to be marketed that then got pulled from the marketplace because of problems like what Woody experienced?
Yes, if you think back, I always think that the big drug safety, where it really got a lot of the attention was when we look at Avandia and Vioxx being two. And if you remember, Vioxx was like for our pain, and people were having all these heart attacks. Well, there was issues in the original clinical trials with them as well. But that was a drug that's been marketed like crazy. I think about I love watching those commercials at the time, and even the commercials for Paxil and Zoloft, and they're off patent now, so there isn't the incentive to do advertising. So the ones that you see on TV right now are all ones that are on brand and are more expensive. A lot of the other original, like when Wood was on Zoloft, that is now a generic. So most people, so the companies aren't going to spend their money advertising it. But, back then it's, the little white bouncing ball. If you are nervous, asking your boss, you might have a chemical imbalance. If it's Paxil, it would have like name tags. It would say, I'm depressed. Yours would say, I'm nervous. Somebody else would say anxious. And then you take a pill, and now clearly my name tag now says, I'm Kim, I'm Ed. And so, there's a lot of the power of marketing. So those are usually, and even now with all the, I just had an interview yesterday with somebody with the Reuters network to talk about the Ozempic and all the weight loss drugs, because they're starting to, not only our stomachs, I mean, not laugh, but the fact that People magazine's writing about it, I'm like, if it's reaching people, I guarantee you it's way bigger of a problem than it's being alerted. And then the UK is already looking into suicide with these drugs. And so I said, you got to really look at these drugs that are big lifestyle drugs, because those are where we usually see a lot of these safety issues, because those are the ones that get marketed to people as, kind of the quick fix. You want to be, I look at even Ozempic during the Academy Award, you had, was it Jimmy Kimmel, or I don't remember, whoever was the MC, he looks out the crowd and makes a joke, and he said, oh, you guys are all looking pretty good. It looks like you guys are on Ozempic, and so it's really like it's in every aspect of our life, and it creates, what we want to attach ourselves to, or people don't even notice that it's in product placements in the TV commercials or TV shows that we're watching. And it impacts the way our media and the news reports, because when you're one of your main categories of sales and that keeps your network alive is coming from drug commercials or Coca-Cola or whatever, it's, even though they say it's church and state for reporting, that they're going to be aggressive, the reality is everybody knows that that money speaks.
Well, it seems as if everything is tied together, and that there's not there's division between left and right politically, but when it comes to business, it's all one, and everybody operates under the same kind of mindset, which is we want to create a brand that can slip into the subconscious of the person, so that when they have feel some kind of need, their natural inclination is to go seek for some kind of drug rather than for some kind of personal discipline to affect change. Seems like that's
absolutely
that's the way we are operating today. And
yeah, I mean, it's powerful. The marketing's powerful. Getting into the subconscious is powerful. I mean, that's why marketing and advertising they're tools that get used.
So it's to me, it's a question of how do we define ourselves? It's a lot of this it comes back to, I think, people having a lack of a sense of identity. They have a lack of a sense of who am I? And so they're looking for something to fill that vacuum. There's a vacuum there of self-awareness. And it feels like that's a trap that many people don't escape from. And it sounds like Woody got trapped into that same sort of thing. It sounds like he had a great sense of who he was, but this drug changed that. It had an effect upon his personality. So he lost that sense of who he was, and all of a sudden he was gone.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So what would Woody think of you today as to how you have responded to his death? What would he say to you?
Well, it's funny because Woody was one that always got involved in taking on issues in the community. So they were going to put at the time, two cell phone towers from competing companies on our corner block, across the street. And he was like, let's go. We got to get signatures. We're going to go down to city council and we're going to get this. They can share one, they can move it, but they don't need to both be in the corner. Right. And I remember him asking me, and I looked at him, I'm like, oh, have at it. Like, you'll never win, Woody. Like, what are you doing? You can't go against the city council and the cell phone companies. And I remember what he said. He goes, I would rather try like hell and lose than do nothing at all. And I remember going, all right, well, have at it. So it's almost like when he died, the baton was, something.
His personality merged into your personality.
Yeah, like he handed me the baton and said, all right. And I was like, oh my God, really? You're leaving me with this one? Like the FDA, the drug companies, are you kidding me? But there was a sense in me that was like, right versus wrong. This is not right. You got to warn. And I think he'd be really, really proud of me, because I also don't, in the past, or who I was, I didn't really stir the pot. I've always been like an account person or a producer. So I'm in the middle. So I have to always know how to balance people. And I would never like stir the pot. And I feel like I've taken on an issue where it is the uncomfortable truth that is hard. And I've had to learn how to I had to do a lot of my own personal growth of like letting it deflect and really getting a sense and grounded in who I was. And so I think Woody would be really proud of how I've handled it, what I've done. And I've also kept true to, he always said, I will never judge my life based on how much money or my career. It'll be based on my family, my friends, and leaving the world a better place. So I feel like I've, honored his life and leaving the world a better place.
So what was your experience like going through the COVID pandemic? What was that like for you, particularly since you had this decade and a half plus of experience of working kind of on the fringes of the government and the pharmaceutical world?
Yeah, well, so interesting. I've never worked on vaccines ever, right, up until this point. And so all of a sudden, when I was watching everything, and it became that we were going to have like a one fix, one way out was going to be vaccinating everybody. And I was like, what? That doesn't seem right. And then I was like, oh, and we couldn't have off-label, like they, started demonizing ivermectin. Well, my experience, every time I would bring up off-label promotion on the committee, they would say, Kim, we're not in the business of telling doctors how to practice medicine. But then all of a sudden they were on this saying you can't use this horse dewormer. And I was like, so that was already like, little, red flags were popping up. Then it became, we're going to rush it to the market, and we're going to get rid of the placebo group. And there were all these things. And then it became marketing. It became bring in your Vax card and you can get a donut a day for a year. by getting the shot. And then you had all the celebrities telling you it's safe and it's completely safe and effective. I'm like, wait a minute. We've all known that a lot of times you don't know what safety is going to look like until years down the road, until it's been put in. And then it became mandated. And so I was watching, oh, and then the companies, the same companies that I knew what they had done with holding data and the safety from antidepressants, Pfizer, they were given complete legal immunity. So if somebody was hurt or harmed or killed, they had no recourse. And so, I saw it right from the beginning. But what was really interesting to me is watching how it was sold to a lot of to the public, and it was sold using the tools of marketing and the fear and fear. And, if you think about it, every day in the beginning, like at noon, you had Governor Cuomo come on and update people on the numbers. Everybody was tracking the numbers, and it became we were so inundated with numbers, and it was this thing that was going to kill everybody. But then they sold hope through this product. And so it was like this two things. So what I realized is once you started to bring these things up, the same tools that I was used when I brought up safety concerns with antidepressants being name called, I was a Scientologist, which I'm not, like all of these things, the same techniques of censoring or quieting or gaslighting or I had people who said, Kim, you have done a great job on drug safety and antidepressants, but you are completely wrong and missed the boat on this one. And I was like, wow, like you've never done anything, and now you're telling me so I saw how it was dividing friends and family, and it was a really tragic experience that is really hard to. But also the flip side is I have met some amazing people, like-minded people that started coming together. And because I think it woke people up to what has been going on in our world for a long time. And so, I always, the kind of person I am, I always like to try to find the good that has come out, but also not forget where we were and what kind of damage it had done for communities and the people and just all the hypocrisies. I mean, it was just like one hypocrisy after another.
Yeah, I see it very similarly to you, and to me the shorthand is that this is an example of what I call the spectacle of the real, and that was something I came up with 10 years ago. Was watching the way ideas were marketed, the way people were. It's not, and it wasn't so much the ideas, but it's the experience of the ideas. The experience, which is, we're going to create this big thing, this big event, this big experience in the moment, and we're going to serialize that so that throughout the course of an hour, we're going to have 8 or 10 of these highly emotional, highly intensive, hyper reality type of events. This is going to be on the news. And so all of a sudden, people are going to be captivated and they have to stay in touch with the screen. And they have to, they begin to feel like if they're not there watching what's there on the screen, they're out of touch and they're going to lose something as a result. And it's that kind of manipulation of people's mindset, of their emotions, that I think is really kind of one way of looking at what you were experiencing, what you have seen over these 20 years. And it's the way I see things, that people need to step back and become much more self-critical and much more circumspect about the messaging they hear, the information they hear, and because it's not all for their benefit.
No, not at all. It's funny. I think back to, again, I was so my education came through going out to DC, and every time we'd be working with Congress, and everything was about for the kids. all of these bills that were happening were for the kids or for cancer. But meanwhile, there were all these things that were being slipped in that nobody was paying attention to. And so, but everybody, they were using all of these situations promoting kids' health, or, and I'm talking specifically because that was my area, health or cancer. And I was, but have no idea what's really happening. It was just a deflection, right?
Right.
Hey, there's a squirrel. And if you keep keeping people on screen at the squirrel, looking at those squirrel, the numbers, like again, when I said the COVID numbers, that constant reporting of dying, and versus having anybody to step back and ask the critical questions. Or if you did, you were, completely removed and, told that you were wrong or censored or misinformation. And I feel like it's really interesting watching misinformation, disinformation, that whole concept of where's the information right there in itself. I think that should be a point for critical thinking for individuals, and also stay away from the news, like stay away from that constant wanting, because it's almost like it's fueling something outside you, that we have to like get grounded and centered here inside first. And so that we know if we are being manipulated, are we being manipulated? Is there another side of the story? And not be afraid of asking those questions too, and challenging. And because I think with challenge, we're also like in this phase that you're talking about, the idea of challenging also scares people. They don't want to be seen as wrong. So we've taught people that you don't want to, be wrong or say something. You want to go with, you want to go with the sheep mentality, like you want to go with the group. I mean, you think about it. We come into this world, like I think almost, I've done a lot of thinking about this. This was really my point of my own personal transformation growth. And I thought a lot about how we come into this world as individuals and to be self-expressive and creative and all full of potential. But slowly we are being brought that we want to be like everybody, just be like everybody. And there's messaging that starts when you're really little and you go through school, and it's like, you want to be in this clique, and it becomes these groups, and it's group think. And I think we have to take a step back, and as individuals, because I think we collectively need each other, right? That's how we get things done. But we have to also there's danger in group think. And I think we've seen groupthink at its finest right now.
Well, what I saw, and this is really problematic, I think, is that I saw people who I was close to, family, friends, who listened and followed people who do not know them, and they do not know directly. They don't have a relationship with them, and they ignore the people who are the closest to them, who have a stake in their welfare, but they would ignore them because the messaging was so strong that if they were to not follow the rules, then something is wrong with them. And I think that this idea of rule following is part of the problem that we have, because who sets the rules? And I'm not interested in even knowing who sets the rules, because I'm going to set the rules that I think are suitable for me and for my family, and for my friends, and for my neighborhood, and for my neighbors, and for my community. I'm going to operate in such a way where what I want to do is build respect and trust between us. I want them to know that if they need me, I'll be there right then and there immediately. If they need me, I'll be there. And I don't, this didn't start with the COVID. This has been something that's been going on for a long time. I saw this in particular in how people that I knew really well responded to Donald Trump's candidacy and his presidency. And when I would say, well, I don't like him or hate him. I'm neutral on him, and I would be criticized for that. I mean, not just criticized. I would be in many cases, I was told that I was insane for not seeing what everybody else knew, was that he was this evil man. Well, maybe he is, but is he any different than any other evil man in that regard? And
Right.
and I saw my relationships begin to change, and I would say to them, the things you are saying about him, you do not know this for a fact. You have been told this, and you have been programmed to say this, and so I reserve the right to say I don't know, and therefore I'm going to watch and observe, and I'm going to make my decisions based on not just who I see him to be in the way he's portrayed, but also in the way people who like him and people who hate him are going to portray him. And that gives me, I think, a much more balanced, broad way of looking at that. I think the same holds true for things like COVID. It holds true for same things like any kind of lifestyle question that comes to us. I want to know what my
Absolutely.
friends say, and whether I agree or not, I want to know what they think.
But I think that's also the kind of the point of really good, I mean, leadership, really good, just being in a community together is being open. And I always say, be willing to at least try something on. I always say, be willing to try on you never wear a black dress, but be willing to try on a black dress. Be open and sit with it. How does it make you feel? And I tell people, even with my work, don't believe what I'm saying. Honestly, don't believe, go do your own research, go do your own thinking, go look in the mirror and what works for you. Because the same thing with Trump. Do I like him? No, but I'm like, I don't know. We're all just being told what to believe. And so, and is it because it's easier? Is it because we're afraid to stand out? Is it because even if you say, well, do you know that, kind of the same thing? I've had similar conversations. You're like being labeled. I'm like, but you don't even know who I voted for. You're just assuming because I just ask a question. That's what we need to do, because I think I've had to do that with my own self. And any time that we are so sure of something, I think that is a time that we actually have to take a step back and ask ourselves and be curious. Why do I think this way? And was that something that I was told that I should believe the way my parents told me to believe? And I think that is what life is part of us, to always be questioning and looking and finding things, and also to be able to be okay with people that aren't like you. I saw this whole thing with, it really did, obviously we saw it with Trump in politics, and then we also with COVID. All of a sudden people were like, that you've been friends with for decades, or family, you are no longer, people disown people because you wouldn't go do this or you believe this. And I thought, really, we don't even know yet what this all happened. We're slowly, things are coming out, right? But you before that made judgments, and you're entitled to make your judgments, but you made judgments that literally tore families apart, because you were so, we became so like stake in the ground, and wouldn't even listen to the other side or listen to the concerns, or and when you're not willing to have conversations because I've already identified you as this, and I've cut you off. Well, how's that benefiting this, your family, your community, your group, your school, your business? It doesn't. We need to be able to have conversations and get out of our own. And that's really where, I think I've always had this belief of labeling, because when I think about it, I had helped start an organization well before Woody died. It was working with kids that had been abused, neglected, at risk, and it was using the power of arts and mentors.
Mm-hmm.
But they would always label those kids and call them broken, and or they were like, oh, these are foster kids, they're bad kids, we got to give them. And I remember this is where I learned the idea of behavior medicine. Well before Woody died, I remember like working with the group of the kids. We got to go see where they live. They're 8 to 12 years old. They don't live at home. They live in a group home, right? Like a college dorm. And I remember going at night, they all stopped by a window and picked up a cup of meds. And I go, are they all sick? Thinking they might have strep throat or something. And their staff person said, oh, no, this is their behavior medicine. And I was like, wait a minute. So this idea of labeling, and we have to be very important, very careful of labeling and putting people in buckets, because a lot of times labels are also self-fulfilling prophecies too. And so whether even against somebody else, you're already creating the environment where you see them, instead of taking and removing the labels or removing these belief systems. And so I think, when I look at all of this and really at my own life, it's about coming to get to know yourself and question yourself, and what are your standards? Where did you get them? It's this constant curiosity of yourself. And because change actually is not out there, the solution's not out there, the quick fix isn't out there. It starts here with me, you.
So let me ask you one last question, and I love to ask this question because so much of what we are facing in the world is so hard and it's difficult. So tell me where you find hope for your life.
Well, I can tell you, for starters, hope comes from me is my faith. I have a really strong faith, and I feel really lucky that I have that, because I don't know what I would do if I thought I was on my own. So I feel like I'm a part of something, and that really is my it's kind of my true north. And it also makes me know that I'm not alone. And I had something that happened when we were throwing, I've always believed, but I don't think it was cemented like it was until Woody died. And we were out throwing his ashes in the middle of Lake Michigan. And it was like a month after, which is where Woody wanted to, he always said he wanted to be back in Lake Michigan. And anyways, my brother-in-law, who was my partner in working in DC, we were holding this box of ashes, was Woody. We look over in the middle of the lake and we look down. I go, what is that? And it's this red book floating, literally a foot in front of us. And I go, does that say what I think it does? And he goes, yeah. It said in gold letters, the Holy Bible. And it floated by us. And the two of us saw it. And thank God it wasn't just me, because they think I was making it up. And at that moment, I was like, oh, wait, this is so much bigger than me as an individual. And that cemented it. So for me, that's really where I get my hope. And I also connections with people and finding like-minded, and to keep you because that you don't feel totally alone. But really, that's where I get my hope.
That's great. I'm with you on that. So, well, thank you, Kim. This has been fantastic. I think we all have a sense of Woody living on through you, and that's a good thing. And I wish you well as you continue your mission and your advocacy work, because I know that over the long term you will have impacted the lives of many people simply by deciding that you're going to go do this. The initiative you've taken is making a difference, and that to me means that you're a leader of impact, and there's nothing greater than I can say for a person than to be able to say that. So I thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thanks. That means a lot. Thank you.
And you know what, everyone? You can be doing the similar thing in your own community. You can just look at something that needs to be done, and you can go do it. You can just take initiative. You can do like what he did and fighting for one cell tower and instead of two. That is always there for you if you're willing to take a step forward and believe that you have something to offer. So this is one of the reasons we do this podcast is so that we can meet people like Kim who are doing things that are extraordinary for those of us who are always on the sidelines. But in reality, she's just living her life out, doing what she feels called to do. And you can be this way too. You can be a person of impact and make a difference in your world. And I hope that for you. So thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Please subscribe and hit the like button. And if you have a comment or a question, please ask again. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time here on the Eddy Network podcast. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.